And I'm probably butchering it, but you said something like we're all going to be returned to the earth at some point when we
Probably
die.
did. Don't remember, but I'm sure I was saying that we're ultimately, right. I mean, you're in a similar space, right? I mean, we are going to die. This is not an impulse purchase like a candy bar at Safeway. This is we're going to die, and we need to prepare for it, and so will our loved ones. And I think that at return home, the cool thing is right when we die, when our loved ones die, the last thing we can do is give back, and I think that that's powerful. And it turned out to be a great deal more powerful than I'd realized. So it's been a heck of a ride.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation podcast with your host, Tyler Yamasaki. Hi, thank you for joining me on the Direct Cremation podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro, the #1 cremation arrangement software for funeral homes. If you like the content, please give us a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. So today's guest is truly a pioneer in death care. As CEO of the world's first large-scale Terramation, or otherwise known as natural organic reduction or human composting, he is really giving a preview into what it looks like to properly launch a completely new disposition type. After nearly 2 decades working in advertising, finance, working overseas in China, he has finally found his way back. Please welcome today's guest, CEO of Return Home, Micah Truman.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I do want to break this up a little bit into different parts. First, I really want to understand where you came from, your background. You know, I did a little bit of research, and I would say that your journey that took you to get here today was as unique as they come from anyone else in death care. So why don't we start in China?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, might start a little before. I was raised overseas. My father worked for the United Nations. So my childhood I was born in New York, but at 4, I moved to Africa. I lived in Africa till I was close to 14, came back to Seattle, Washington, finished up high school, went off to college. After college, I went to China, I went with a one-way ticket. I was sent to a peasant village that my college, Oberlin, had for like a relationship with it, like 100 and some years. I think we lost a dozen people in the Boxer Rebellion in the late 1800s. So there I was in this little village, and the timing was very good because China was just opening up, and there was nobody there at the time in terms of a Western presence, and so it was a really unique experience. So that was 94, and I did that year in the village. I moved, learned to speak Chinese, moved to Beijing, opened up one of the first online ad agencies. Moved from that over to the Knot, which was a public. I believe it's private now, but it was the largest. I'm not sure. Wedding media company in the world. And from there, I opened up a finance company, and we were raising capital in China and deploying it in the United States to large real estate projects. And I did that for a decade, and that was a very good ride. And then came back to America in 2014 and was trying to decide the next thing to do. And my obsession's always been, how do we create a company that the bigger it gets, the better off the world and the company is for it? No BS. Like, let's not greenwash it. Let's not make up stories. Let's figure out how to do something that can really do that. And I found 2 kinds. I found companies that were really environmental and really amazing in small towns doing local craftsmanship, hand knitting socks, and with local fair trade yarn. And they were environmentally amazing, and they were terrible businesses. And then there were fantastic businesses, and they were, purporting to be environmental, and they were the opposite. They were fantastic businesses, but they were anything but environmentally conscious. And so how do we sort of square that circle? And that was what I was about. And ultimately, it's a long story, but it led me to where I am now.
Interesting. Would you say that any of your background in any of those jobs that you mentioned, you kind of led you to where you were today, or was it all kind of unique every single time? And Return Home was just kind of a unique idea that, coalesced from the eco side and the business side?
At the time, it was somewhat happenstance. I live in Washington State, in Seattle. Washington was the first place to legalize Terramation. It was coming across, the news. I was sitting with my mom, and my mom and 2 of her, Jewish buddies from New York. And, I was like, Ma, look at this. This is wild. This is really crazy. And my mom said, no, it's not crazy in the slightest. I would do it. And her two buddies who were sitting there said, can you get our bodies from New York? Because we do it too. And that was unusual. And it really got me sort of thinking, and gently, slowly really began to think about that. And the thing about Terramation, you might like it or not, but it's going to live in your head rent free. And it was certainly in mine, and I couldn't let it go. And so I began to do testing in January of 19, and one thing led to another. And I ended up doing it. But this has been, I think, the greatest journey of my life. This has been the thing I love doing more than anything I've ever done, hands down, no question.
Yeah. Okay. I saw something, and I'm probably butchering it, but you said something like we're all going to be returned to the earth at some point when we
probably did. Don't remember, but I'm sure I was saying that we're ultimately, right? I mean, you're in a similar space, right? I mean, we are going to die. This is not an impulse purchase like a candy bar at Safeway. We're going to die, and we need to prepare for it, and so will our loved ones. And I think that at return home, the cool thing is right, when we die, when our loved ones die, the last thing we can do is give back. And I think that that's powerful. And it turned out to be a great deal more powerful than I'd realized. So it's been a heck of a ride.
Okay. So I really want to get into the business side and the motto and the values of Return Home itself, but maybe we can just step back a little bit and talk about the process of Terramation or natural organic reduction, or what human composting is, how it works, kind of some of those details, and then we can get into more of the Return Home brand and funeral home itself. Yeah. So why don't we start with the process?
Okay. Yeah. So the process takes 2.5 months, more for much larger people, less for much smaller. Mm-hmm. It's an in-vessel system. We place, our vessels are 8 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, 3.5 feet tall. We fill the vessel with organics, alfalfa, straw, and sawdust. Alfalfa is nitrogen rich, straw is insulating, sawdust is absorptive, right? We're 70+% water. We are, how would I say it? Like, we're freaking butterflies. And this is from the finance guy. I know it's boring. We're built to transform. We're filled with microbes. The microbes transform the food we eat into the energy we use. The moment we die, those microbes flip and they begin to transform us. And what we do in our vessel, when we place that body in the vessel with the organics, is to speed up that microbial process. So microbes like heat and moisture and oxygen, we supply them with a lot of all of those. The body goes up to about 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit in about 48 hours with absolutely no inputs. In about a month, the body is completely transformed. Bones remain. We reduce those bones, much like we do with cremation. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the bones are different. They're not incinerated. The bones, the shards, are then placed back in that soil where the microbes then, because bones are wild. They're very hard on the outside and very porous on the inside. And the microbes take that porosity, that fragment of bone, and transform that piece too. After about 2.5 months, we are left with soil that we then give back to the family. And it's stupid beautiful.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you were actually able to break down the bones as well in the whole process.
Well, yes, the bones completely transform, but we fragment them, right? You can't take a whole bone. It could be done, but it would not allow for the time frame that we have.
Yeah.
But yeah, when fragmented, oh boy, it's a very fast transformation. Absolutely no part of the body is separated, and it all transforms.
Interesting. When we talk about the timing, let's leave the bones out of it, because I know that's like another step, but it sounds like it's quick. The elements that you use to do this, is that still a very natural process? Like you mentioned 3, I would call it ingredients, but those are the 3 just plain elements that you use and the body will break down? Or is there
there ain't no more. Yeah, really? No, it's nor do we add heat. Mm-hmm. This simply allows our body to do what it was meant to do. It's mind-blowing, and it's true. And we've helped hundreds and hundreds of families. So yeah, it's tried and true, and it's really something else.
How much quicker would you say it would be than if you were to do, let's just say, a natural burial in a natural cemetery with no casket, and not embalmed? Is it still quicker?
Well, you're hotter and colder and wetter and drier, right? If we
Hmm.
got buried in Arizona, you'd mummify. If you were in the North Pole, you'd freeze. So it's a little hard, but all things being equal, it takes some years, a couple, 3 years, maybe,
Hmm.
depending, and your body would go. I mean, that's why our Earth is not littered with bodies, right?
Yeah.
We transform, but we take our own sweet time. But I'd say a matter of years for sure.
Got it. Okay. So you turn that process that would quote unquote naturally happen, but you were able to speed the natural process up by
Oh yeah, yeah. No, we're able to put real afterburners on that, and it happens really really quickly.
how much soil is generated from this when you're done?
8,000 pounds. No, 250 250 pounds are produced roughly for each Terramation.
Hmm.
The family can now remember it's a mix, right? Why 250? It's because we're using a 2-to-1 ratio, maybe even more, of organics to body weight. So a 100-pound person could have 300 pounds of organics around them.
Hmm.
But because we have so much water in us, that of course dissipates. The family can take as much or as little as they want. I bought an 8-acre woodland, and we scatter at no additional charge for the amounts the families can't take, and they take home what they wish to. Our families, the majority of them take all of it, which was kind of surprising.
Got it. And I know that, you know, when we cremate somebody and we have the cremated remains, that's actually not really good for growing anything. Uh, can you explain, like, do your soil actually help things grow, or is it, just dirt?
Well, dirt helps things grow. And actually, we're not dirt, though. We are compost. So,
Mhm.
we are the stuff of life. Um, if you use our compost to place in the earth and to grow plants, it's a very, very powerful accelerant.
Got
So
it.
it's very nitrogen rich. In fact, it's so rich that we ask our families, don't make a mountain of soil and put a tree in it. It's going to burn it out with all that nitrogen. So it's an amendment. You have to put 2-3 inches above the soil and till it in. But yeah, this is absolutely the real deal. And it is an incredible accelerator and essentially restarting that whole life cycle.
Okay, so let's talk about return home, the business. I have seen these other forms of disposition start to come out. I know, there's Terramation, there's, let's just say, alkaline hydrolysis, there's cremation, and you know while cremation seemed to have gotten to the point of being as cheap as it can get, I think we've seen that. Um, the other two have been pretty expensive. Would you say that, you think that cost is going to remain that high, or do you think with scale, with more that can be cheaper, or where do you see that being?
So when you're referring to cost, you're referring to Terramation cost, where it's at and where you think it's going. Is that the
Yeah.
question? Yeah. So our price right now is $4,950. So it puts it on the high end of cremation, and at least in Seattle, a third the price of burial, maybe a quarter.
Yeah.
So we are sort of in that range. I see prices dropping, but I also see prices segmenting. People are going to have different needs. There will be the equivalent, I would imagine, of direct Terramation.
Mhm.
And I think that price will continue to drop. And I think there will also be different needs we can get into. And those will obviously have a higher price point. So we can get into what happens in a Terramation facility and how our families say goodbye. But it's a very powerful experience and it's very different. And that will have, I think, a higher price point. I think it's going to be good for the industry because what we have now is a really high value disposition that our funeral directors can actually practice their craft and serve their families with. It's both a profitable disposition and it's a beautiful one. So I think giving this to our funeral communities is a pretty important thing.
Okay. Why don't we talk about, so return home is a full service funeral home, right? By license, or are you a specialty type of license?
No, we are licensed straight up as a funeral home.
Okay.
And we also have a natural organic reduction license, both as a facility and as operators. We have individual licenses for operators. So we are a funeral home. We have to be.
Mhm.
And we are also an NOR licensed facility.
I see. Okay. And then like, if you why don't we walk through a simple process? Like, let's say a family finds you on one of the many channels that you obviously advertise on. But let's say a family finds you and calls you. You take over that whole process like a normal.
We do. We are a funeral home. We care for the decedents just like any other funeral home. Mm-hmm. The difference with us is that an enormous percentage, a significant percentage of the families who come to us come long distance, come from outside the state. Mm-hmm. So we've served 30 states and all the provinces in Canada. So it's common to take someone from Long Island or from Texas or from Minneapolis. So we're very adept at this point at doing ship-ins and caring for our decedents in that way as well.
I see. Does that add to the price as like a ship out plus the
Sure does.
Okay.
So the way we do it is we charge the price we charge, which is $4,950. Shipping is billed separately and we don't add margin to it. Mm-hmm. But yes, shipping costs thousands of dollars and families do that quite commonly. And more often than not, the family also comes themselves.
I see. And I'm assuming there's no embalming, right?
That would be a bad thing. No.
So are you packing in dry ice to ship then?
Either gel packs or dry ice. Yep.
Okay.
No problem at all. And shipping over state lines is no issue. 49 of the 50 states allow it. And there's Alabama because it's Alabama. But with that exception, shipping, no issue at all.
Okay. So let's talk about your primary customer then. Like, what drives someone? Like, if you maybe have your ideal customer profiles, like what drives each type of customer that you have?
Totally. And it's actually kind of surprising. So I'm guessing what you're thinking, and I'm guessing you're thinking is what I was originally thinking, which is going to be your urban, tree-hugging, Subaru driving, somewhat environmentally focused Birkenstock wearer. Those exist. My mother. But they are a small portion of the whole. There are 3 segments, and they're kind of counterintuitive. All right. We have our first, and they're not the biggest. That's the smallest. The second is people who don't want to be buried and don't want to be cremated. I am a claustrophobe and I don't like the idea of fire. Do you have an alternative? There's our second. How many of those have you seen? And here's the most interesting one. The most common is I just want to do what I want to do and I don't want anyone to tell me different. I'm a farmer. I want to go under that crabapple tree that my grandfather planted on my land and I don't want to have to deal with all this BS. I just want to do it. We get more farmers, ruby red Republican from the east side of the state, than we do urban Subaru drivers.
Wow.
And that's our biggest segment.
I would have never guessed that.
Me neither.
And that's just what started happening. You didn't.
But here's the thing. I mean, think about it, dude. Like, we always put people in these silos, right? Mm-hmm. Like someone on the east side of the state who is a farmer and conservative is not an environmentalist. Really?
Well, they're farmers.
These guys, really? Mm-hmm. These guys want to, for example, hunt. I mean, people want to preserve their land. They want to make sure that the animals stay healthy and are there so that they can teach their children to do the same thing their parents taught them. They'd like their soil to go to the same stand of trees where they've always hunted before. We always make it an either or, and it's anything but. People are really excited to do that. So I think it's sort of the myopia of this world where we go, this guy's this thing and that guy's that thing. No, we find a huge number of people tend to come from the rural and agricultural areas because they understand the land. And they understand it a lot better than someone who lives in the city. And it matters to them. And so that's really cool.
Do you see the process getting faster in a way that may accommodate people who need to do it quicker? Or do you feel like you've kind of reached a technological maximum at this point until are you like experimenting on new ways to do it? Or how does that work?
When I first started, mm-hmm. I thought we were cooked. A 2-month lead time struck me as an impossibility, as something that the consumer would not accept. And what we've learned is in the hundreds and hundreds of families we've served, we have never once had a family have a problem with time, mm-hmm. which is really interesting. We get obsessed with time, but actually we're not. We just think we are. People, I think, if I could be so bold, actually don't do so well when their loved one dies today and you get an urn of hot ash 48 hours from now. I think we're used to it, but I don't think it's comforting. And I think our hearts can't keep up with our heads. We have to slowly come to the realization we've lost our person. And I think that turning this into an instant ash box is not the answer. And I don't say that like I'm making excuses. I actually believed it was the answer when I started. But we have so much data from so many families who truly don't care at all that we realize, I think, that it's not. Mm-hmm. But there's another thing that we have to think about, and it's one of the great sins of our industry. Sure, I could. I bet you I could do it in 3 weeks, but I don't think you want me to. I don't think if it was your mother, you'd want me to. Mm-hmm. But we're so accustomed in this industry to say, like, let's just close our eyes. Let's not talk about that. You say 3 weeks. I like 3 weeks. Give me 3 weeks. But to do that is to do things that are unacceptable. And the problem is, if we want to be honest and we want to be transparent, if you're going to look a mother in her eyes and tell her what you're going to do with her son, no, I'm not going to do 3 weeks. And yes, I absolutely could. And I think
I'm imagining that's making smaller pieces that will compost quicker.
Let's go right to it. Yeah. If you grind a body up into paste and then mix it with organics and force heat and water and air through it and go real fast, I've never done it, but I bet you could. But it begs the question.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Is our love of time so powerful that that's what we're willing to do? So there's only two choices. We can either not tell our families, don't ask, don't tell, and give it to them in 3 weeks, or we can tell them and have them be horrified. And that's I have a rule, and the rule is if you can look somebody in the eye and tell them what you're doing and not break eye contact, you're doing fine. Mm-hmm. And if you've got to make up stuff and look somewhere else, you aren't. And I can't do 3 weeks like that.
I mean, I get what you're saying, and I totally agree with it. I think from a outsider, right? I'm looking at it on like a business side, right? Because
so am I.
For 2 months, you have to hold that container, right? That pod, and it's taking up space, it's taking up overhead, it's taking up whatever, right? And obviously, I understand that that's the process and that's what's happening. But from a business sense, like, you know, you would always look at things to how can we optimize that to make it quicker,
and make no mistake, right? But underneath that optimization, and I think it's really important. And by the way, I have a finance background, so I'll spreadsheet it like you will. But I think it's also really important. And by the way, our facility pencils incredibly well. Like the model is accretive. It's a very profitable model. And yes, you want to squeeze more profit out of it. But like any other company, the value you give your families, the brand name you have, the quality and the care that you deliver are as important as your churn and burn. And there is an inflection point and a balance to be struck. Do we want to be faster? Sure, I'd like to be somewhat faster. Do I want to do things that I think might be compromising or problematic? I think I wouldn't. But again, when we go back to data now, because I'll be honest, I really thought we were screwed. Yeah. 2 months was too darn long. But I was stuck, right? What else am I going to do? I've got the 16,000 foot facility. Got any ideas? But what we found was we have no pushback. And that's not the area of concern. Families give concerns and don't choose us. But largely, it's not timing that is the primary driver of that choice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Cost is a problem, right? $5,000, but we can do an $800 cremation. That's a really big one. A lot of families can't afford that. So that's a big one. And then just concern, right? Like I feel more comfortable with cremation than I do with Terramation. I just don't like it. I don't want to. That's a big one. They do it. And that's another really major one. Yeah.
Let's get into the economics. You said that there's segmentations that you can have now, are possibilities for like a
Absolutely.
direct Terramation, for example. So I don't know if we can get into that without talking about like what you do in terms of memorialization as the funeral home, return home itself, right? The soil stuff is, the process, but I'm sure return home wraps around it, memorialization and what you do and service and all that stuff, right? So maybe we can talk about the things that you do in terms of memorialization around that.
Absolutely.
What does return home do right now? Like what kind of, I guess, packages or however you describe it?
We actually keep it really simple. It will probably stratify over time. Remember, we've got a disposition that's brand new.
Yeah.
And if you add at this point a huge amount of complication to it, I think it adds to the already confusing amount of information the families have to receive.
Yeah.
So for us, we keep it extremely simple. Our Terramation price is $4,950, and we have a laying in. That is what we call a laying in. I guess traditionally we would call the viewing. And that's where the family comes here to be with their person, and that's $1,000 for 2 hours in our facility. But that is the extent of our charges. We don't do a great deal more. And the Terramation itself is a profitable business. Mm-hmm. And obviously the laying in works very well as well. And we simply keep it at that. What I think we will see in the future is people saying, don't come to the facility, simply terramate your loved one. We will deliver you soil. And that's where things get a lot cheaper. At this point, especially in the life cycle of the disposition, I'm not inclined to do that right now. I don't think that's really where we want to go, but I certainly could see that happening in the future and that price dropping significantly off of that direct terramation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think people should race to the bottom, but like you mentioned before, I'm sure there are people within that 800 to 5,000 range that would choose it if it wasn't so different in terms of the economic, challenge that some might face.
Here's the thing. A lot of people, I won't say most, but a lot of people, my mother is a well-to-do person, mm-hmm. and she would have been delighted to get the cheapest cremation she could get her hands on, and then go rent a country club and everyone could go eat bagels and lox and do that, right? We often equate financial attainability with cheap, but really what we've done is cut off our nose to spite our face. We're giving a service that is unbelievably cheap on the cremation side. We've made it a faceless, nameless, featureless, serviceless product.
A commodity.
Utterly. Swipe here, and off you go. You probably know it far better than I do. But when that happens and I'm choosing it, why wouldn't I choose the cheapest? And that screws our industry up. That's why people are working for crap hours late at night on the night shift at a retort. I think it's a difficult economic model. And I think it leads to problems in every way, right? It leads to low margins for our funeral homes. It leads to crappy wages for our workers. It leads to lousy service for our families because there's no money in there to provide it. And I think what's important is that we start focusing very much on providing that and why it matters. And you really can't do that with cremation. What are you going to do? Cover a retort in flowers and then put your person in it? Like there's only so much lipstick you can put on that pig. But in Terramation, there's an enormous amount that can be done. And actually in burial, you could too. But it's about showing why a family should choose it. Look, man, you've lost people, I have no doubt, right? So have I. It's your last shot, dude. You've got one crack at it. Don't you want to do it right? Don't you want to say bye to your person right? I think we all do. I think it's innate in us. And I think we've just never given the consumer on a real scale basis that opportunity. We just said, you know what I can do? I can do it real fast and real cheap. Shucks, we got a special. I'll give you a twofer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what does the operations look like at Return Home? Like how I know you're like one of the largest, or if not the largest one in the world, I guess.
Yeah, really, in the galaxy.
In the galaxy.
I am the
how many
god.
How many families could you be serving at any given time, and how many people are on your staff?
Yep. So we run a fairly mechanized facility. It's 16,000 feet. Our machinery is all bespoke. Our back of house, doing all of our back of house processing, can be run with 2, sometimes 3, but mostly 2 people. Mm-hmm. Our front of house, in terms of funeral service, actually is a lot more labor intensive, just because we're serving families, and that's not an easily scaled model.
Yeah,
I think I have 10 staff, front and back of house, not including pre-need. And it's a really efficient and really cool operation. So yeah, it runs lean and it runs well.
How is pre-need sales? Like how is
pre-need sales is bananas.
Yeah.
So here's the deal, right? If you look at your demographic, the demographic that resonates the most with our disposition are the younger groups, not the older groups. So we go well north of 6 figures a month in our pre-need. And we break every mold in terms of how we sell it. So typically, right, your average funeral home is going to sell with, I don't know, I'm making it up, but not really, 15, 20 mile radius of your facility, give or take, right? We sell to most states in America and to Canada. And so we have this incredibly wide geography that we're selling to. And it makes for an incredible pre-need business, like really unreal. And I didn't even realize that when we started. I thought we were a local business, but we weren't, obviously. Look back, duh. No, we're not, but here we are. So pre-need, what's the ratio for a funeral home? It's like, I think 1-to-1 on pre-need is considered decent for every decedent you take. Oh gosh, we're multiples of that. Mm-hmm. We're multiples of that. And it's only going to get stronger.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about legalities?
Sure.
Was Washington the first state or one of the first states that was legalized?
Yeah. Washington was the first state.
Okay.
I think after that came, I can't remember. It was like Colorado, Oregon. And now we have 12 states that have legalized, which include California and New York. But there's a difference between legalization and I don't know if the right word, but like ratification. That is, you legalize it, but then you have to create regs and then begin the business in the state. So, for example, California legalized, but has taken 4 years to create the regs, and that will happen, in January of 2027. Mm-hmm. So you've got 12 states, which comprise, I think, almost 50% of the U.S. population that have legalized or are in the process of ratifying. And then we've got a bunch more behind them. I mean, this legalization is going to sweep.
But they're not like in California, you can't actually run a funeral home yet and do the composting.
No, you cannot.
Yourself. You have
but
to.
But you can in Oregon and Colorado and a number of other states. But no, California is not there yet. You're 10 months from now, 2 years from now, we'll be off the races.
Got it. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then legally, like let's talk about religious exceptions. I know cremation even to this day has gotten, with certain religions, it's like not even allowed, or it's just getting allowed now. And cremation has been around for how many millennia? So, from a fun fact, what do other religions say about Terramation right now?
So the way we typically see religion interacting with Terramation is the more doctrinaire the group, the more restrictive they are towards disposition.
Yeah.
And I think that runs the gamut, cremation, burial notwithstanding. It's not that we can say a Christian won't do it, mm-hmm. but we might say, or let me put it this way, I'm Jewish. A Jew wouldn't do it. We wouldn't say that, but we would probably say a Hasidic Jew wouldn't do it, right? A really, really conservative, observant. And we see that with the Catholics. We see that across the board. And so it's much more that the more literal they are in their interpretation of that religion, the more we see restriction. But most people aren't on that right side of the spectrum, right? I've had rabbis in here. I've had priests in here. I've had I've had, Muslim burials and it's been a Buddhist burial. So we've seen a lot of different things. It's just a matter of where on the spectrum those different groups sort of, what space they occupy.
Well, I almost feel like the Jewish way can be told in a way where it is almost like a natural burial.
I'm kind of down with that. I'm not even laughing. I'm like, heck yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, totally. And it's really interesting to see how the Jews are handling that, right? There are some wrinkles, but I was talking to this rabbi, really cool guy. And he was really funny. He goes, I was like, so what do you think? He's like, he said, listen to how we talk about it. He said, we talk about Jewish or religious tradition. When you talk about tradition, the word tradition, that's what people are used to. That's not the word of God. That's not scriptural. It's tradition, right? Jews used to put their deceased right in the ground and then after a period of time remove their bones and put them in a cave. That was a couple thousand years ago. That was Jewish burial tradition. We've changed it. So what I think the rabbi said that was cool is tradition can change, but the word of God can't. And the word of God is the Adamah, the earth, where we come from. We come from it, we return to it. And our sacred obligation is to guard it. He said, and so I am willing to deal with tradition because I am answering the word of God. And I think that's kind of a cool way of thinking it.
Yeah. Well, when I first heard about it, I almost didn't think of it it's almost like a more natural way. And especially after hearing the way that you do it, it's not like you are introducing a ton of different chemicals or anything to make it happen. It's just returning it to the earth in a very specific way.
I will gently return us to the earth.
Yes.
And I like that idea. I like the idea of going back. I like the idea of not blowing the place up. And I like the idea of quietly going. It just seems like I'd like to return the favor. I've had a really nice ride. Mm-hmm. I've enjoyed that and I'm grateful. and maybe my return might provide something for somebody else somewhere down the line. And that's comforting.
Mm-hmm. Are you, what are the plans for Return Home? Are you kind of seeing this as a way to just grow the Return Home brand into multiple locations and grow? Or would you say that there is I want to say like trade business kind of way to do this? Like what do you see as your path that you're going to take for Return Home?
You're going to hate this. The answer is yes. So we are Return Home. We are powerfully branded. We have 1 million people following us on socials. I think we've made a stronger brand than most in a shorter period of time than many. We've been voted best of the best in 2 out of our 3 years, by the NFDA. We were Washington State Funeral Home of the Year in our first year. We have a brand that's really strong, but a trade business is vital to what we do. Mm-hmm. And we work with dozens and dozens and dozens of funeral homes across Washington State and the country. And they forward their decedents to us and we care for them. And that part of the business is important as well, because most funeral homes are not going to open up a $3 million, 16,000 foot facility.
Yeah.
And the thing that scares me is a funeral home might decide to open up a 2-vessel facility and it could be a complete mess, right? So we're hoping that I think our funeral partners end up working with companies that really, this is a lot. There's a lot to this. And the consequence of failure is unacceptable. Yeah. And so we find that most of the funeral homes are looking to partner. And we do that as well. So long way of saying yes.
How many families are you able to serve now in any given month?
Oh, gosh, on the order of 60, 65 probably, right? Because we have a 2-phase process, but in the first phase, we have 70 vessels, and that goes for a month. And the second phase is in the back of house for another month. So I would say I would put it in the mid-ish high 60s.
So they don't stay in the vessel for the whole time?
No. What happens is when they're in vessel for that first month, that's where the transformation is happening. Mm-hmm. But once that's done, the body's transformed and we reduce bone, we put them into a cube because you don't need a vessel anymore. That vessel is immediately cleaned, sanitized, put in front of house and reused. And we're using the same vessels that we did when we started 3.5 years ago.
I see.
So it's pretty efficient.
Could I ask you some more fun questions?
Well, you looked off to the side and broke eye contact, so I'm going to say maybe. Let's see what you got.
Is there a smell?
Oh, I thought you were going to throw something hard at me. No.
No.
Well, of course, but no. Think of it like a brew pub, right? So brew pubs, beer, sticky, smelly, messy, right? But they've developed machinery that let you sit with your buddies and have hors d'oeuvres, right?
Yeah.
Identical with Return Home.
I see.
You sit in our facility. We've got a system, a very big system called, we call it Octopus. My first PR guy was like, never call it Octopus. And then I got rid of that PR guy and now I call it Octopus. It pulls air out of the vessel, out through the facility into a biofilter and filters it naturally and then out into the open air. And it is absolutely odorless. Now, if you were going straight into the air with it, yeah, I think you'd have odor, but it's a different odor. What's weird about it is it's not a classic decomp odor. Decomp is anaerobic. That is when they're starved for oxygen that it begins to rot. This is an aerobic odor. It's not the same, but it is odorous and we're absolutely able to mitigate it. If we didn't, we would be in serious freaking trouble. It pisses me off, right? Because like down the road from us, we have a marijuana processing facility. You know what I mean? And I'm like, look at those guys, man. We're clean as a whistle, So, we've been able to manage pretty well.
Got it. And I'm assuming there's no waste.
None. It's mind-blowing. Seriously. Nothing goes down the drain. CO2 goes into the air. It is true, right? It breathes CO2, and that is what it does. But really, it is unbelievable. It is absolutely without, there's just basically nothing to drop down a drain.
And then there's
or burn in the air.
Burning. Yeah.
No. I remember one guy was sitting with me, and again, my PR guy would be like, never say this. We were sitting outside our biofilter one day, and this guy looks at me. He goes, "It smells like an everything bagel out here." And I was like, "You're sicker than I thought." But no, for the most part, we really are able to really just completely mitigate it. And if we didn't, we would be shut down overnight. It would be so rough, man.
Yeah. I'm sure the smell of the bodies.
It's not that it's the body. Here's the thing. It's not that. It's that if people said, there's a smell, and it would not smell like a body, and it came from our facility, that would freak the pants off.
Of course.
And of course, everyone, like I said, is chill about the marijuana processing facility down the street. They're like, I know what that guy does. So we're held to a higher standard, and we can't make mistakes. We really are not. We don't have that latitude. And so we don't.
I see. Let's just say from like a business model.
Sure.
Do you think that you can operate a smaller, profitable business in Terramation NOR, or do you have to do it at a scale? Because you have the timing thing, right? And obviously, we talked about the timing, but you have the timing thing, right? There are constraints there that are going to keep it so that you can only process so many families in a given time, right?
Yeah.
So without the massive scale of 16,000 square feet, and even because you do have acreage where you can even put the soil after you're done, right? So, without those things, which I'm assuming were a ton of startup costs, which I do want to talk about too, because I do know you guys were crowdfunded, but do you think it is possible for a smaller funeral home to be able to do this once they start seeing legalization and stuff?
Here's the thing, Tyler. Let's leave economics aside and talk about the DNA of a company, right? Like companies have a footprint, a thumbprint, who they are. They're a technical company. They are whatever, an operational company. Funeral homes are not technical operation company. They operate a retort. That retort is a push button. These guys are not experts at building, maintaining, or fixing retorts. They have someone else do it.
Correct.
Terramation is more complicated in that there's quite a few steps, and the average employee in a funeral home is not up for doing it. When someone puts a couple vessels in their facility, I'd be very curious to know who they're going to bring in to run it, because the person that runs it is not the person that typically staffs a funeral home. They're a technical, hardworking, it's a hard job, it's a technical thing, it's very operational, there's a lot of machinery. And my concern when we drop two vessels in there is they're not going to be able to hire someone that can do it. They're going to say, "Sally, you're the funeral director. Get these two vessels going." And that I think could be really problematic. Now, the one thing that would obviate that, and it's coming, like my buddy Seth Vidal, I love the man. He's just coming up now out of the Natural Funeral in Colorado. He'll be actually at TerraCon, our annual conference, and he's showing his vessel. He's selling them 4 at a time. And ostensibly, they should work. It's just that if there are problems, if there are issues, if anything goes wrong, who's there? And you haven't got enough scale to have an expert.
Yeah.
And that's where my concern. So from a business model standpoint at the root level, I'm concerned about the manpower and skill sets that will run. Assuming that this people could run 4 a month. Let's say they're charging $6,000 or $5,000 to do it. It's a $20,000 gross margin. What did they pay for the machinery? What are they paying monthly?
Yeah.
What are their consumables? We don't have enough sunlight on that model yet, but it does strike me as thin.
Yeah.
That's a lot of brain damage and to get that done. And the cost of failure for your business. You've made a mistake. You haven't done this right. And your 100-year-old funeral home is going to have to bear the brunt of that. I see a lot of that. Until somebody is able to build a unit that you press a button like a washing machine. And we are nowhere even close to that.
Mm-hmm. How much of that is regulated in the process of like what materials you're using? And or how much was that developed just for what you do? Like what is covered in the NOR like licensing rules, I guess?
I don't quite understand the question. What do you mean?
Like you mentioned there was 3 different things that you put into the
Yes.
container, right? Is that like your own homebrew recipe, or is that mandated to say these are the different things that you use?
Kernels, herbs, and spices, baby. No, we this is unique to us, and different groups use different things. The rule is organics, and I don't even know the nomenclature for it. You know, there has to be an organic mixture placed around the body. That is a scientific necessity to begin the microbial process.
Of course, yeah.
But the specifics of that are not, at least in any of the states that have ratified, been made specific to any one state. Everyone's going to have their own way.
Got it. So then that makes it even harder for a smaller proprietor to try to do it themselves, because you would have to have the research and understanding and testing to do that, right? Like you can't just
it's a smart question.
Put in random stuff. It's not
no, this is a smart question, Tyler. I think about this a lot. The companies that are going to supply vessels on limited levels, like Seth Vidal, and he's an excellent guy. He's a great guy. He will be supplying the vessel and the organics.
Got it.
And part of the deal is you don't use my organics, you can't use my vessel. I will remove it and take it back. So there is an element of control with that.
Okay.
And I think that there will have that. But it's also quite expensive to buy those vessels, hundreds of thousands of dollars for 4 of them. So how do you make your money back if you're doing it 3, 4 at a time? It's an interesting model, and I think smart guys are trying it. But I think I'm going to keep my hat out of the ring for the moment.
Well, you've already got a head start. So,
well, but actually, no, I was sweating it. We were getting calls, and they were like, "Give us your tech." And I was thinking for a while maybe we'd consider it. But there was just so much that I think could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you give them your technology and they're in Maine, let's just say, and I'm in Seattle, and all hell breaks loose and things go wrong, at the end of the day, even if they've done the dumbest stuff you've ever seen, right? The guy's got himself a 12-pack of Schlitz. He's off, down the block, sleeping it off. We are ultimately going to be the ones holding that back. Yeah. And I'm sure you know this. I don't like being responsible as a business person for factors that I simply have no control over. Makes me very scared. Shoot, I'm scared enough of the factors I can control.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I see.
Right?
So what's next for Return Home then? Like, are you looking to build new facilities?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is going to be the real push. And it's not going to be a flashing hurry. Take our time, get this really right. Our service is so cool. And we can get into that in a moment, but I think it's worth describing. Make sure that our SOPs are set. Make sure that our socials and our outreach, like we've got an incredible microphone. Like we can reach so many people now.
Yeah.
And once we've got it where we want to be, we will carefully expand into the states that, we think are worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, we will be doing that across the country.
Okay.
Yeah, no question. It's the whole object of because if you don't, you're just a weird guy, right? We're just a weird boutique until we have scale, right? Anything's weird. Imagine, ready? I'm going to say to you, Tyler, hey, Tyler, you never heard of this before. Let's do this. Let's cremate somebody. It's called cremation. We're going to put them in an incinerator. We're going to incinerate them. Then we're going to grind their bones, put it in a plastic bag, and then charge you for the urn. And you're going to be like, you're sicker than I thought. But if enough people do something, it normalizes. Same thing for me. I'm going to put a body in a vessel. I'm going to use microbes, transform it into soil. Are you kidding me? But if we have enough people saying that and believing that, it normalizes. And it only normalizes when we have scale.
Okay, so here's a question. How much apprehension do you have of this, let's say, not taking off or like not continuing? Do you feel that Terramation is going to become, like, it's already past the point of like being a trend that maybe doesn't keep going? I
mean, you're a business owner. I'm scared absolutely all the time, aren't you? I'm terrified of everything. I'm terrified of my own damn shadow half the time. So if I stood flat-footed in front of you and said, by God, I feel 100% confidence nothing can go wrong, I'd be lying and you'd be laughing. Of course I'd get worried about that. I think that alkaline hydrolysis is a very interesting case in point. It came out with a lot of fanfare, but I don't know if it's quite kept that similar momentum. I have my reasons for believing that Terramation is going to continue its trend, and so far it has, and I have my beliefs. But do I think it's a foregone conclusion that that's what the world is going to do? No, I see a possibility of anything. And does it scare me? Yeah. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur that's built a large space that's built on a disposition that is brand new. Like, if you're not afraid, there's something deeply wrong with you. But at the same time, what we're seeing, the pickup we're seeing, the increase is really something else. But that does not mean doesn't flatline one day.
Yeah.
And I think about that. Yes.
What do you know any rough numbers about how many, what percentage you have in the States? I guess you said you're not necessarily a local business, but I'm assuming that there's more local business than not.
No, I would say the bulk of our business is non-local.
Okay.
And local is an interesting one too, right? I'm almost to a point now where I consider Washington State local, which means it's a 5-hour drive. I would say if you're thinking local, like an hour from our facility, I'd say 70% is non-local.
Oh, okay.
Which is really cool. It means we have a real nationwide footprint. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's a really, really cool thing. But is this, come on, you've been in this like I have. A lot of people go, this is a flash in the pan. This is not something that necessarily has legs. But the reason that I think it does goes back to the beginning of our conversation. I think in our bones, we want to gently go back to the earth. I think we like that. I think what's different about Terramation is when we do this, people call us and say, I'm terminal. I'm not happy about that. I'm going through a really hard time. But the brightest thing that I can think about is that I'm going to do this. Because my wife says she's going to plant irises, and they're the plants I always wanted. Mm-hmm. We had a kid who passed, who was 7 years old, and she liked the bees. Her mother had her soil put in 100 small bags and gave it to all her friends and had them plant things that fed the bees. That resonates. It resonates with all of us, and I don't care who we are. And that's something that can't be done with any other way. And I think that's why this kind of thing has legs.
I see. Okay. No, I agree with that. I'm just,
Oh no!
Trying to ask.
I hope I'm not, and I hope I'm not trying to sugarcoat. I see, of course, I see risk, but also obviously some really amazing upside and transformation that comes with it. Mm-hmm. I mean, here we are, right? 3.5 years later, serving multiple hundreds a year and growing, doubling yearly.
Awesome.
Well, wish me luck in 2025.
Good luck.
I'm looking in my rear view mirror clapping. That's not the way to do it.
So, I mean, you and just like a handful of others are kind of leading this charge. Mm-hmm. Like normally I'll ask how do you see death care in 10 years? But I think more specifically, where do you see this in 10 years? Like doubling every year puts you at a pretty big scale in 10. So, where do you see this part of the, I would call it, industry going in the next decade?
If it's not doubling every year for the next 10 years, then we've actually made a mistake. Okay. So it actually has to. Even on that level, it needs to, because we have 2.5 million decedents, right, in America. So it's going to need to do that to keep pace. And I think that it's very possible that it will. Mm-hmm. The challenge becomes, is that something that will catch with mainstream? But the folks that come here are mainstream. And that's the part that kind of blows me away. I think we're where we want to be. Think of it this way. Like, we've got dispositions that people do but don't love, right? And if you look at other cultures, the people that care for our dead are the most important people in our town, our village. And the things we do are the most heartfelt. But we don't do that. And we want to. We just don't know we do. I mean, we've done this for so long. So it's like, no one says I'm going to be cremated and it's just a real motivation for me. It really makes me feel better. That's not how it goes. And I think that we really do have a hole in our disposition product line for someone to be like, hey, this makes me feel better. Mm-hmm. It's fluffy, but isn't emotion what drives our industry? Isn't that what makes people buy in the funeral industry? How we feel? So I think we have to pay attention. And I was not cognizant of that at the beginning.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that I didn't cover or didn't ask you that you think other people should know more on the industry side? Obviously, that I've seen your consumer stuff and it's amazing, and you've done a really good job creating a community and a audience for what you're doing. But is there anything on the other side of it that you want to tell?
Yeah, I think I really screwed up in the beginning. I think when I first opened the facility, because I'd not, initially it was so brand new, I thought no one would set foot in it. And when we opened it up, people began piling into it. I just couldn't believe it. And I designed our facility like Costco. It was not sexy time here. And that was a big screw up, Tyler. Mm-hmm. And it took a huge pivot to realize people wanted to be here. And then people wanted to sit next to their person. And then they wanted to fill their vessel with flowers and jelly beans and a bottle of cheap scotch. And then they wanted to decorate the outside of their vessel. And suddenly what we have is this river of humanity going through here, saying the most insanely beautiful, heartfelt goodbye. And I am not that guy. I'm not like, let's have, let's buy crystals and kumbaya. But I'm telling you that sitting here with these guys is absolutely unbelievable. The ability that people have to say this, to do these things. And we don't actually have the structure to do it in traditional service.
Yeah.
And that was the part I missed. And that's been really mind-blowing. And then building SOPs and processes around it has been incredible. Ready? I'll give you one, Tyler. Let me get this right. Woman comes in and she's lost her daughter. She's 16 years old to suicide. And she goes, I really want to be able to put my kid in the vessel with my own hands. And then I want to fill it with flowers. Can I do it? What do you do?
Say yes.
I would have said no, but sure. Say yes. All right, let's say yes. How are you going to do it? Don't worry. I'm not expecting you to know. We get this a lot. And then it's like, holy freaking cow, what do we do? Mm-hmm. And so we had to develop entire business processes to allow for it. Ready? 3 steps. 1, does it show love and care? 2, is it safe and legal? 3, does it work? Anyone in my company, if they can answer that question to the best of their ability, and it's never been done before, I trust you, go do it. All right, buddy. Because you can't run it up the flagpole with that mother standing there.
Yeah.
So for me, the area that I think I've loved the most as a business person, because I think you're obviously pretty astute that way, is to scale businesses that allow for that kind of care with a rubric that allows for scaling and expansion. And that's just gets me all feeling a certain way, right? We can help people and we can do it with business processes that we know how to do. Anyway, didn't know any of that crap, but learned it. And it's beautiful, says the old guy.
Great. All right. Well, I think this was super enlightening. I've wanted to have someone come and talk about human composting for a long time. And I'm glad that you joined me because this was very informative, but also very interesting. And
thank you. And I appreciate you giving me the chance and being gracious about me being late. So thank you so much.
No. Yeah. And I think it puts a lot more humanity and color to it that we would have never heard about if we hadn't spoke. So thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to
No, man.
tell the world?
TerraCon. Yeah, TerraCon. 4th and 5th of February in Tacoma, where everyone's in love. Come hang. Got people coming from all over the world. 250 people in person, 700 people on the Zoom, 600 mortuary students. It's going to be wild. Come to Tacoma and hang out with us.
All right. And where can people reach you and learn about TerraCon?
TerraCon.life, TerraCon.life is the site. And of course, we're Return Home, returnhome.com. And I thank you so much for your time, Tyler.
Thank you. For the Direct Cremation Podcast, I'm Tyler Yamasaki. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Micah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.